let's give you a few little exercises now that are going to help you develop your handspan and your stretch if you're struggling to reach certain intervals, such as an octave. Now, when we talk about an octave, we're talking about a single note and the next note of that same value either above or below it. So let's go above it. So let's take C, let's take middle C. Here it is. The next C up from that is an octave apart. Now, I can do that fairly easily. My hands are, or my fingers are quite long, so I don't really have this particular problem. But a lot of people do struggle to stretch it. And that's absolutely fine, because what we need to do is just sort of develop your technique enough. Firstly, that we can use our wrists enough that we can stretch between those sort of intervals if we're playing something fairly fluidly. But also, we can use exercise to sort of make the stretch more comfortable in the first place, so that if we do need to play together, then we can do so. So what we're going to do is focus firstly on broken chords. And broken chords are a great get-in for this. They don't tend to do them anymore for exams. They tend to go straight in for arpeggios. But if you're a bit unsure of going straight in for arpeggios, go for broken chords first. And what a broken chord is it starts you off with basically, let's take C major as our sort of benchmark for all of these exercises going forward. So the triad is C, E, G. Now, if you want to just get your wrist working and just sort of make sure that you've got the right kind of movement, you remember we were talking about wrist movement a few videos ago, what you can do is just C, E, G, E, C, E, G, E, like that, but make sure that your wrist is sort of following it. Remember we talked about the doorknob method, that's what we're incorporating here. So I'm using fingers 1, 3 and 5 to do that, but now we're going to start doing a broken chord, and in order to do that I'm going to use fingers 1, 2, 3 and 5, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go C, E, G with fingers 1, 2, 3, so, and then I'm going to repeat the E and the G, and with finger 5 I'm going to add the C on the top, so there you go. And then I'm going to work back down, 3 and 2 on G and E respectively. So altogether you've got 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, if you're struggling to stretch, the whole point of this exercise is that you can work your way up towards the top and back down. As soon as you press that bottom note, work your wrist so that you've sort of made your hand move more towards the top end, or once you press that top note, move it more towards the bottom end with the second note, so that you're sort of moving your hand up, and then you'll be able to achieve a much clearer accuracy with the note. So rather than trying to span the whole thing, what we're doing is we're just sort of breaking you into the stretch. So that's that. And of course an arpeggio is very, very similar to that. So what we're going to do with an arpeggio is literally just up and down. And we're going to use the same fingers, 1, 2, 3, 5, and we're going to go C, E, G, C, G, E, C. And we're just going to repeat that using the same wrist movement. And when you feel a bit more confident with that, what you can do is start to experiment by moving finger 5 down and closing that gap a little bit at the end of the arpeggio. So give me a full arpeggio first, and then take finger 5 down to the G, like that. So C, E, G, C, G, E, C, 5 on G, and then repeat. And what you're doing here is you're closing the gap and then immediately spreading the gap back out. So it's getting you used to finding the notes amid all these changes. And what we're going to do is we're going to increase the value of that G by a note each time. So that's on G. Now we're going to go to A, but we're still using finger 5. Now we're going to go to B, still using finger 5. And now back to C. And then you can repeat that as many times as you wish. And it's finger 5 every time on that last note. And the whole point is that you're developing that stretch and that ability to find that note in spite of the fact that they are farther apart than maybe what your hand can actually span. Okay, so now we've looked at those, we're going to move on to the octave jump, and the octave jump is literally what it says on the tin. Now, in order to best achieve these, think about them staccato, right? Because that will give a really clear emphasis on what comes between the notes, which is obviously the need for you to move your wrist in order for a nice, clear and rhythmic discipline here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take C, we'll stick to C obviously, middle C and the C above it using fingers 1 and 5, and we're going to staccato it and put a rhythm, just alternate between the notes and put a rhythm. Now, I'm not going to do it like this because, as you can see, I'm kind of missing the point. I'm just guessing here. We need to ensure accuracy, so what we're going to do is once we've pressed 1, we'll bounce the wrist or move the wrist fluidly between them like that. And that will really help you get used to the movement that your wrist needs, because once you're familiar with that, what you can then do is start to join the notes together, and what you'll do is be able to close that gap much more effectively. So what you can do is, using the same sort of technique, is that. The best thing that you can do when you're preparing for it is, obviously, as well as using that wrist movement, is to have a fair stretch already set out. You know, it's no good sort of playing so that your hands, your fingers, your two fingers that you're using are really scrunched up together at one end like this, so that you have to move your whole hand. You know, spread them apart. If it doesn't reach the whole way, it's not a problem. Just spread them apart as best as you can, and just minimise that movement that you require between the notes. And once you've done that, what we can then move on to is thinking about increasing the intervals as we play them. So what we're working towards now is playing the two notes at the same time, the two notes of an octave span at the same time. Now, to do that, cold turkey might be a bit much. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a perfect fifth. We're going to use thumb and we're going to use finger 5, so finger 1 and finger 5, and we're going to use, obviously, the perfect fifth being C to G, so C and the G above it in the right hand. And all we're going to do is just vamp that. Now, as you do this following exercise, it's important that you take note of not just what notes that you're playing, but how it feels, because every time you make a slight adjustment, you're going to have a very subtle difference in what your hand feels like, the direction that it feels, the pressure on one side of the hand. Because what we're going to do now is take finger 5 and replace G with the next note up, which is A. There you go, and switch between them. Keep a rhythm going, keep a nice pulse going, and then replace it with B in finger 5. That's a major 7th interval. And then once you feel a bit more confident with that, you can work through them. You know, mix them up a bit, why not? And then you're literally just one step away from that last C, which is the octave, which is what we're aiming for. Now, what you may notice is that you've got a little bit of a strain going more towards the right hand side if you're using your right hand, and that's normal because obviously you naturally want to sort of dominate more what's happening at the top register of the keyboard. So if you're playing here, you will feel a little bit more of a lean, if you like, towards this end, and that's absolutely fine, because once we get used to that distance and that interval and we feel that it's fairly secure, what we can do is move on to the next exercise, which is ensuring that we keep that discipline within our hand as we move between octaves. So make sure that you can keep a good discipline with just the octave C's by playing that a few times. And then what we're going to do is just a very basic pentascale up and down with octaves. So D, E, F, G, F, E, and just do that a few times. What you want to do is focus on one finger. I like to focus on the top finger, but it doesn't matter. Whichever finger's a bit more, whichever finger feels a bit more logical for you. I would suggest probably the top finger for most people. And focus on that and what that's doing, because in theory, if you've got that discipline really, really well in your hand, then your hand should, your thumb, or maybe if your little finger, if you've chosen to focus on your thumb, whichever other finger you're not focusing on should just naturally follow. So if I focus all my efforts on that and just keep my hand absolutely disciplined, then it will just follow naturally on. And that's what you're looking for, really. Now note also, I'm playing quite near the edge of the keys here. You don't want to be playing up here, because all these black notes here are going to get in the way. They're certainly going to get in the way when you start moving between the octaves. You can already hear me sort of playing the wrong notes there. I'm not doing that deliberately, that's just natural, that happens. But even if you're just playing one note over and over again, you get this sort of sensation of clutter, because these fingers that you're playing with start to touch the black notes and it feels awkward. These fingers start to touch these black notes and it can sort of put you off. You know, you want a very clean approach, so go right near the edge of the key, and that actually helps you stretch better anyway. So, you know, if you're struggling to stretch, make sure that you are playing well towards the end of the key there. Okay, once you've done that pentascale a few times, just double speed it and see how your discipline really is. So when I say double speed, what I've done there is I've just replaced the crotchets with quavers, and I've doubled up on each note, so C, C, D, D, E, E, and so on. Okay, and then what we just need to do is work on filling in the gaps a little bit. So one of the other things we have to remember is that it's not just enough to make sure that we can get a nice interval like that. Obviously that's great if we can get that, but also we can have extra strain and extra pull. If we start to play notes in the middle of it, we can feel that our hand starts to want to close back up again. So what we need to do is just develop that stretch whilst we're playing a chord. So let's go back to the C major triad, fingers 1, 2, 3. And what we're going to do is just play that in a rhythm, and I'm going to use finger 4, everybody's favourite finger. I'm going to play A on top of that triad. So I'm playing 4 notes now, C, E, G and A. And then I'm going to move it up to B. So finger 4 on B. And then I'm going to develop it, or resolve it, with finger 5 on C. So all the time that you do that, just think about how the new position feels for you, because what that will do is it will just put you in a really, really good good frame of mind for when you've got the need to play different chords in different hand positions. You know, you'll be instinctively a lot better with it. You know, you won't just have to focus on what the notes are. You know, your hand position will speak volumes, and it will go much more naturally into that position. It will just altogether feel a lot more natural. Now, it's also worth just trying out a little experiment just to see if there's slightly less conventional chords that we can develop, because we're not always going to be playing nice triad chords with that note on top. So what I'll do is I'll give you a C. This one is called C suspended second. So it's C, D and G working up. We're going to use fingers 1, 2, and we're actually going to use finger 4 for this, which is unconventional, but I'm doing it deliberately because we're going to just try and develop that stretch a little bit. So C, D, G, fingers 1, 2, 4 respectively. And what I'm going to do is take G up to A with finger 4. And then I'm going to replace it with finger 5 on the B, and of course finger 5 on the C. And all the while that I'm doing that, because I've obviously caused more tension at this end of the scale, at the lower end of the scale, it's obviously wanting to pull the top end of my hand back. So what we're doing is we're sort of breaking away from it and trying to say to our hand, no, it's okay, we can do this, we can still pull that way whilst the other side of the hand wants to pull this way. So there they are. They're really basic exercises that can really start to help. Most of those are adaptable entirely in reverse for the left hand. Obviously for some of those chord ones you just want to watch the fingers a little bit. Usually fingers 5, 2 and what, for example that last one, 5, 4 and 2 would be a good sort of starting point for that chord. But yeah, if you just sort of play around with them and develop them, and they will really help you to sort of develop your stretch and your span up to an octave. Now you've got to remember that being able to span and stretch an octave is a luxury, I'll give you that, but it is absolutely not essential to be able to play brilliant piano. Doing things like this is going to help you get as near as you can from, if not an actual stretching an octave point of view, then from a performance point of view, you're going to be able to carry a piece of music that requires you to do those kind of stretches in ways that you can develop to suit you. So many people out there who play amazing pieces of music, but they just don't have the span, and that's not a problem, you know, it doesn't stop people. And I always say, think about the young children as well. You know, you see these children who enter these piano competitions, they're absolute prodigies, and think how small their hands and their fingers are. So don't worry and don't be disillusioned if you can't span that octave, or you can't even span close to the octave. Just work on developing your span as you go with these kind of exercises, and you will progress and you will flourish and become a great pianist.